The notification lit up my phone at 2:47 a.m. Another download. Another listener discovering the podcast that destroyed my best friend's career while rebuilding my shattered soul. Some might call it revenge. I call it justice. And it all started with 13 words that changed everything. This week, we are diving into a survivor's story that will shock you. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because every betrayal has its roots in trust, and mine grew in the most fertile ground possible, genuine friendship. Tasha Williams entered my life like a hurricane disguised as a gentle breeze. We met during our sophomore year at Northwestern, in Professor Martinez's media ethics class, of all places. The irony still makes my stomach churn. She sat 3 seats away from me, furiously scribbling notes while I struggled to stay awake after pulling an all-nighter at my campus job. When the professor asked about the moral implications of sharing personal stories without consent, Tasha's hand shot up like a rocket. "I believe," she said, her voice carrying that confident tone that would later become her trademark, "that we have a responsibility to be voices for the voiceless. Sometimes people cannot tell their own stories, so we must tell them with dignity and respect." The professor nodded approvingly. I remember thinking how articulate she sounded, how passionate. After class, she approached me with a warm smile and coffee-stained fingers. "Hey, I noticed you look dead tired in there. Want to grab some actual coffee? I know this place that makes liquid motivation." That coffee turned into 3 hours of conversation that flowed like water finding its path. We discovered our shared love for true crime podcasts, our mutual hatred of pineapple on pizza, and our dreams of making a difference in the world. Tasha wanted to create content that mattered, stories that could heal people. I wanted to help others who had walked through darkness find their way to light. "I think we are going to be great friends," she said as we parted ways that evening. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching under our feet as we walked across campus. "I can tell you have stories worth telling." If only I had listened more carefully to those words. If only I had heard the undertone that would later reveal itself as hunger rather than empathy. Our friendship bloomed over the next 2 years like wildflowers after rain. Tasha became my confidant. The person I called when my anxiety spiked, when family drama overwhelmed me, when life felt too heavy to carry alone. She listened with what I believed was genuine care, asking thoughtful questions, remembering details that others forgot. When I finally found the courage to share my deepest trauma with her, she held my hands and cried with me. It happened during our senior year, on a particularly brutal November night when the weight of my past crashed into my present like a freight train. I had been triggered by a scene in a movie we were watching together, and the floodgates opened. Between broken sobs and shaking hands, I told her about the assault that had shattered my world 3 years earlier. I described the hospital visit that felt like being violated all over again, the PTSD diagnosis that gave a name to my nightmares, the therapy sessions that slowly taught me how to exist in my body again. Tasha listened without interruption, her eyes filled with tears that I mistook for compassion. When I finished, she pulled me into the tightest hug and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me with this. Your story is so powerful. You are so brave for surviving and even braver for sharing. Please do not tell anyone," I whispered into her shoulder. "I am not ready for others to know." "Of course," she replied immediately. "Your story is yours to tell when you are ready." I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. After graduation, we maintained our friendship despite living in different cities. Tasha moved to Los Angeles to pursue her media dreams, while I stayed in Chicago to begin my career as a social worker. We texted daily, had weekly video calls, and visited each other whenever possible. When she told me about her idea for a mental health podcast called Healing Voices, I was thrilled for her. "I want to create something real," she explained during one of our calls, her face glowing with excitement on my laptop screen. "Too many podcasts exploit trauma for entertainment. I want to honor people's stories and actually help them heal." "That sounds incredible," I told her, meaning every word. "You are going to change lives." "I hope so. I really want to be a voice for people who feel silenced." For the first 13 episodes of Healing Voices, I was Tasha's biggest supporter. I shared every episode on my social media, recommended it to friends and colleagues, and left glowing reviews wherever possible. The podcast was gaining steady traction, attracting a loyal audience who appreciated Tasha's thoughtful approach to mental health topics. She interviewed therapists, researchers, and carefully vetted survivors who had given explicit permission to share their experiences. I should have known something was wrong when she started asking me seemingly casual questions about my trauma during our regular calls. Questions that felt like gentle probing rather than caring check-ins. "How did you feel in that exact moment when you realized what was happening?" she would ask, her voice soft and concerned. "What were the specific words the doctor used when she explained your diagnosis? Can you describe the physical sensations you experienced during your first panic attack?" I answered because I trusted her, because I thought her questions came from a place of love and support, because I believed she was asking to understand me better, not to gather material for content that would eventually destroy our friendship and my sense of safety. The day episode 14 went live, I was at work, helping a teenage client process her own trauma. My phone buzzed with a notification from the Healing Voices podcast, and I smiled, looking forward to listening during my lunch break. The episode title read, "When Survival Becomes Your Identity, a Story of Campus Assault and Recovery." My blood turned to ice. I excused myself from the session, my hands trembling as I found an empty conference room and pressed play. Tasha's familiar voice filled the space, warm and professional as always. This week, we are diving into a survivor's story that will shock you and hopefully inspire you. Names and some details have been changed to protect privacy, but the emotional truth remains powerful and raw. What followed was 43 minutes of my life laid bare for thousands of strangers to consume. Every detail I had shared in confidence, every vulnerable moment I had entrusted to my best friend, repackaged as content for her growing audience. She had changed my name to Sarah, and altered minor details like the specific college and the season when the assault occurred, but everything else was unmistakably mine. My assault, my hospital experience, my diagnosis, my therapy journey, my panic attacks, my sleepless nights, my slow climb back to feeling human again. But worse than the violation of sharing my story without permission was how she had twisted it. Tasha had added dramatic elements that never happened, embellished details to make them more shocking, and stripped away every moment of strength and resilience I had fought so hard to build. In her version, I was not a survivor who had clawed her way back to life. I was a victim frozen in trauma, defined entirely by my pain. She described panic attacks that were more dramatic than reality, added therapy sessions that never occurred, and invented family conflicts that did not exist. She had taken my story of survival and turned it into trauma porn, designed to elicit maximum emotional response from her audience. The comments section was filled with people praising Tasha for her brave storytelling and powerful representation of survivor experiences. Some listeners shared their own traumas in response, believing they were connecting with someone who had given permission for this public sharing. Others analyzed my experience like it was a case study, dissecting my reactions and recovery process without knowing they were discussing a real person who had not consented to this exposure. I sat in that conference room, my whole body shaking, feeling more violated than I had since the original assault. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. This was not just someone stealing my intellectual property or sharing gossip. This was my deepest wound, my most vulnerable moments, transformed into entertainment for strangers who had no idea they were consuming my pain without my permission. I called Tasha immediately, my hands shaking so violently I could barely dial her number. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent a text message, trying to keep my words measured despite the rage and devastation coursing through my veins. "Tasha, I just listened to episode 14. We need to talk immediately. You used my story without permission. Please call me." Hours passed. No response. I sent another message, this one more direct. "You know that was my story. You know I specifically asked you not to share it. How could you do this to me?" Read receipt, 6:43 p.m. Still no reply. I could not eat dinner. I could not focus on anything except the growing number of downloads and comments on an episode that had stolen my agency and transformed my trauma into content. Every notification felt like another person consuming my pain without my knowledge or consent. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed with a new Instagram post from Tasha. A selfie of her wearing expensive headphones, looking thoughtful and artistic, with a caption that made my blood boil. Healing hurts. But the truth helps. Sometimes we have to brave the difficult conversations to create space for others to heal. Episode 14 is already touching so many lives. Thank you for trusting me with your stories. Hashtag healing voices, hashtag mental health awareness, hashtag survivor stories. The comments were filled with followers praising her bravery and vulnerability. They had no idea she had not shared her own story, but mine, stolen and repackaged for her growing brand. That night, I cried harder than I had in months. The tears were not just about the betrayal, though that pain was excruciating. They were about feeling powerless again. About having my voice taken from me by someone I loved and trusted. The same helplessness I had fought so hard to overcome came flooding back, threatening to drown me in its familiar darkness. But somewhere between the tears and the rage, something shifted inside me. A spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. I had survived assault, trauma, and the long journey back to wholeness. I was not going to let Tasha's betrayal break me again. I got up, wiped my tears, and opened my laptop. If she was going to profit from my story, then I was going to tell it myself, in my own voice, on my own terms. I spent the entire night researching podcasting equipment, hosting platforms, and legal considerations around sharing personal stories. I wanted to do this right, ethically, in a way that honored not just my own experience but the experiences of anyone who might listen. By sunrise, I had ordered a professional microphone, downloaded audio editing software, and created accounts on all major podcast hosting platforms. The name came to me as I was setting up my first recording session, Reclaimed Voices. Because that was what I was doing, reclaiming my voice from someone who had stolen it. My first episode was titled, What Consent Means, Even with Friends. I did not mention Tasha by name, but I did not have to. I told my story truthfully, completely, and on my own terms. I talked about the violation of having personal trauma shared without permission, about the particular betrayal that comes when someone you trust uses your pain for their gain. But more importantly, I talked about healing. Real healing. Not the dramatic, simplified version Tasha had presented, but the messy, non-linear, complicated process of rebuilding yourself after someone has tried to destroy you. I talked about therapy that actually worked, about setting boundaries, about learning to trust your instincts when they warn you about people who see your pain as their opportunity. I talked about consent, not just in relation to physical experiences, but in relation to our stories, our vulnerabilities, our most private moments. I explained how sharing someone's trauma without permission is its own form of violation, creating secondary trauma that can be just as devastating as the original experience. The episode was raw, honest, and unpolished. I did not have Tasha's professional broadcasting voice or her expensive equipment, but I had something she did not: authenticity. I was telling my own story, not performing someone else's trauma for entertainment. I uploaded the episode at 3 a.m., added a simple description explaining that this was a podcast about reclaiming narrative power and healing on your own terms, and went to sleep expecting maybe a few dozen downloads from friends and family. I woke up to 847 downloads and climbing. Someone had shared a clip on TikTok, just a 30-second segment where I talked about the difference between sharing your story to heal and having your story stolen for content. The video went viral overnight, with thousands of comments from people sharing their own experiences of betrayal and violation. This gave me chills. Someone did this to me too. Finally, someone talking about consent in storytelling. Where can I find the full episode? This is what real healing sounds like. Within 3 days, my first episode had been downloaded over 50,000 times. Spotify featured it in their mental health category. Apple Podcasts included it in their new and noteworthy section. I started receiving messages from listeners thanking me for putting words to experiences they had never been able to articulate. More importantly, I started hearing from other people who had been exploited by friends, family members, and content creators who had used their stories without permission. The comments section became a space for survivors to connect, support each other, and reclaim their own narratives. I knew I had to continue. Episode 2 focused on recognizing emotional exploitation in relationships. Episode 3 featured a therapist who specialized in trust and betrayal trauma. Episode 4 was about building healthy boundaries with people who claim to care about you but consistently violate your needs. Each episode grew my audience exponentially. Not because I was exploiting anyone's pain or creating drama for entertainment, but because I was creating space for honest conversations about healing, consent, and the complex dynamics of trust and betrayal. 3 weeks after launching Reclaimed Voices, I had surpassed Tasha's listener count. A major therapy network reached out offering sponsorship, not because they wanted to profit from trauma stories, but because they appreciated my ethical approach to mental health content. I was invited to speak at conferences about consent in storytelling and ethical trauma representation in media. Meanwhile, Tasha's podcast began losing listeners. People were discovering Reclaimed Voices and recognizing the stark difference between authentic healing content and trauma exploitation. Her comment sections filled with questions about consent and criticism about her previous episodes. Several guests contacted her to remove episodes featuring their stories, suddenly understanding that they had been used rather than honored. 2 months after I launched my podcast, my phone lit up with a direct message from Tasha. Her first communication since I had discovered her betrayal. "Can you stop? You are making me look like the villain." I stared at those words for a long time, feeling the familiar surge of anger mixed with something new. Pity. She still did not understand what she had done wrong. She was not concerned about the harm she had caused me or her other guests. She was worried about her reputation, her brand, her image. I did not respond to her message. Instead, I prepared for my next episode, which would feature Dr. Rebecca Chen, a trauma therapist who specialized in helping people heal from betrayal by trusted friends and family members. Dr. Chen and I talked about something Tasha had never addressed in her 43-minute exploitation of my trauma: the actual process of healing. We discussed how real recovery happens slowly, with setbacks and breakthroughs, with professional support and careful boundary setting. We talked about the difference between sharing trauma to heal and sharing trauma to entertain. Healing requires safety, Dr. Chen explained to my audience. And safety requires consent. When someone shares your story without permission, they are not helping you heal. They are perpetuating the cycle of violation that trauma creates. That episode became my most downloaded yet, with over 200,000 listeners in the first week. Mental health professionals began recommending Reclaimed Voices to their clients. Universities started using episodes in their media ethics courses. I received messages from people saying the podcast had helped them recognize exploitation in their own relationships and find the courage to set boundaries with people who had been using their pain for personal gain. 6 months after launching Reclaimed Voices, I signed with a major podcast network that committed to ethical trauma representation and survivor-centered content. My show became their flagship mental health podcast, reaching millions of listeners worldwide. I used my platform to highlight other survivors who wanted to share their stories on their own terms, always with explicit consent and collaborative storytelling approaches. Tasha's Healing Voices quietly ended after 37 episodes. She moved into lifestyle content, focusing on wellness trends and self-care products. We never spoke again, but I occasionally saw her posts on social media, promoting retreats and workshops about authentic living and finding your voice. The irony was not lost on me. Today, as I sit in my home studio preparing for another episode of Reclaimed Voices, I think about the journey that brought me here. What started as the worst betrayal of my life became the foundation for the most meaningful work I had ever done. By stealing my story, Tasha inadvertently gave me the motivation to reclaim not just my own voice, but to create space for countless others to do the same. I think about the thousands of messages I have received from listeners who found healing through honest conversations about trauma, consent, and recovery. I think about the therapists who use my episodes to help their clients understand healthy boundary setting. I think about the content creators who now ask for explicit permission before sharing other people's experiences, understanding that ethical storytelling requires more than just changing names and details. Most importantly, I think about the person I was before Tasha's betrayal, and the person I became after choosing to transform that pain into purpose. She tried to silence me by stealing my voice and using it for her own gain. Instead, she gave me the determination to speak louder, more clearly, and more authentically than I ever had before. My phone buzzes with another notification. Another download. Another person discovering that healing happens when you reclaim your narrative from those who tried to profit from your pain. Some people still ask me if I ever regret exposing Tasha's exploitation. If I feel guilty about the impact on her career and reputation. My answer is always the same: I did not expose her. She exposed herself the moment she decided to use my trauma for her content without my permission. I simply told the truth about what happened to me, in my own voice, on my own terms. That is not revenge. That is justice. That is reclaiming your voice from people who tried to silence you by speaking louder. The microphone sits in front of me, ready for today's recording. Today's episode will feature a conversation with 5 other podcasters who are committed to ethical trauma representation, discussing how content creators can honor survivor stories without exploiting them. We will talk about the difference between amplifying voices and stealing them, between supporting healing and profiting from pain. As I adjust my headphones and prepare to hit record, I smile thinking about how different my life would be if Tasha had never betrayed my trust. I might never have found my voice as a podcaster, never have created this platform for ethical healing conversations, never have learned that sometimes the most profound growth comes from the deepest wounds. She stole my story for clout, believing she could use my pain to build her brand and advance her career. Instead, she gave me the fuel I needed to build something far more powerful: a movement toward ethical storytelling and survivor-centered healing content. You do not get to silence me by speaking louder. Not anymore. Not ever again. I hit record and begin to speak, my voice steady and strong, carrying the truth that no one can steal because it belongs entirely to me. Welcome to Reclaimed Voices, where healing happens on your terms. I am your host, and today we are talking about something crucial: how to tell stories that heal rather than exploit, how to amplify voices rather than steal them, and how sometimes the most powerful thing you can do after betrayal is simply tell your truth. The red recording light glows steadily, capturing words that will reach hundreds of thousands of people around the world. People who are learning to reclaim their own voices, set their own boundaries, and heal on their own terms. This is what real healing sounds like. This is what authentic storytelling looks like. This is what happens when you refuse to let betrayal be the end of your story, and instead make it the beginning of your most powerful chapter. The microphone carries my voice out into the world, where it joins millions of others who have chosen to speak their truth despite those who tried to silence them. Together, we are creating a chorus of reclaimed voices, each one proof that you cannot steal someone's power by stealing their story. You can only give them a reason to speak louder. Thank you for watching this powerful story of betrayal, healing, and reclaiming your voice. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of resilience and triumph. Your support helps us continue sharing these important narratives that remind us all of our strength and capacity for healing. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, so you never miss a story that might change your perspective or give you the courage to reclaim your own voice. Together, we can create a community where everyone's story matters and everyone's healing is honored.